Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is the Vulgar Marxist. It always entertains me watching people walk right up to the edge of socialist thinking, look over the cliff and go, nope, 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 nope. The recent bout of YouTube AdSense nonsense has given us a very clear picture into this phenomenon. We are joined this evening by two gentlemen, Thunderfoot and Logic, who, confronted with the reality of how dependent they were upon the revenue they received from YouTube, shrank at the conclusion that the sale of labor is inherently coercive.
So yeah, this has rattled an awful lot of people, and justifiably so. So for me, YouTube was always a bit of an option. And I've been a research scientist for 20 years. I mean, even if YouTube were to fold tomorrow, this would be troublesome for me, but it wouldn't be like the end of the world. Right? I'm still a fairly respectable research scientist, but there are other people for who that certainly isn't the case, where this is basically they're committed to making videos on YouTube. They are entirely dependent on this, and it's a very brutal environment that YouTube can just change its mind, and all of a sudden that's it. You're essentially going bankrupt after this. And yeah, it would actually have a fairly big impact on me as well.
Phil Mason's charity is well taken, but Logic goes one step further and makes not merely 1 point, but 2 points, both of which I would like to discuss this evening.
Now, I had expected that AdSense would survive for at least long enough for me to be big and successful enough on this platform that my Patreon would naturally grow enough that I wouldn't need to rely on it so much anymore, on AdSense. But that hope is dead. And if AdSense crashes to zero, I can't even pay half my bills. I have a mortgage, condo fees, baby expenses. I have to feed everyone in this family, have to, keep the power on, all that shit. And if AdSense goes, I can't do that. So here is the choice that I'm facing. And I can't wait to make it. I have to make it based on the information I have. This month, I have to make a decision about whether I'm going to continue to do this or if I'm going to look for a full-time job again. And I want to keep doing this. And I think you guys want me to keep doing this. Even if my wife, Izet, gets a full-time job, she's not going to make enough to make up for the AdSense loss. I'm the one with the education and experience, and the only person who's going to make decent money, more than minimum wage probably, is me. Even then, who knows? We would both have to get a full-time job, most likely. Last month, when I started here on YouTube, I made almost as much as I did at my full-time job. That's taking into account AdSense and Patreon. This month, I'd be lucky if I'm looking at half of that. I'd be very lucky.
Now, I would like to deal with the first point raised here, not so briefly, or as briefly as can be reasonably dealt with. And that is that in order for markets to function at all, it is necessary for buyers and sellers to be free to start or stop buying and selling whenever they see fit. This is why free markets are called free. If sellers are forced to continue selling regardless of changes in price, then the market will inevitably be oversupplied and cannot clear efficiently. The same is true of buyers. If people are forced to continue purchasing an item regardless of the utility or their desire for it, demand flies through the ceiling and prices skyrocket. What Thunder and Logic are expressing in their videos is the concept that they have no interest or desire to sell their labor in the present market, that it would not financially benefit them to engage in the sale of labor. This necessarily implies that they consider the market oversupplied. It's entirely their right to say, as producers of labor, that the market, being glutted with far too much labor already, they should not have to sell at a loss, or a potential loss, or even at a profit unacceptable to them. Yet this is exactly what is being forced upon them. Logic in particular expressly and flatly states that his desire to continue doing YouTube is thwarted by the financial burdens of his family, and in doing so raises a second and almost more critical point, that were YouTube to fail for him, not only he, but also his spouse, would be forced to sell their labor when they would very much prefer to keep their labor for themselves. And this is one of the reasons why I have so little patience or interest with the idea that free markets can exist independent of a socialist state. That is, the only way for sellers and buyers to be perfectly free to sell their labor when it is only in their financial interest to do so is if they are guaranteed shelter, food, and clothing in the event that they do not want to sell their labor, or are unable to sell their labor, or are disinterested in selling their labor for whatever reason. Which brings us to the second and more critical point that Logic raises, that both he and his wife would have to get full-time jobs.
Even then, who knows? We would both have to get a full-time job, most likely.
This is one of the ideas that I have had rattling around in my head almost since high school. From the very first time I looked at a supply and demand table, I realized that if only one of the bars is moved, then what would functionally happen is a negative feedback loop. That the more value that was sold to the market, the less each unit would be worth, and that quite potentially the unit price would fall faster than the unit supply increased. I've drawn this graph to illustrate this point, and I'd like to walk you through a parable of sorts. Let us say Logic was not able to find a college job, but instead forced to work at a burger joint for $8 an hour at 40 hours per week. He would thus earn $320. Now, Logic has already flatly stated he does not enjoy such work, and might well ask his manager to cut his hours. Now, let us suppose, simply for the sake of argumentation, that Logic is the only worker in the entire US economy, and so the market price shifts exclusively based on his labor. Cutting his hours from 40 hours a week to 30 hours a week produces a corresponding increase in the price of labor as the supply has just declined. This increase would be from $8 to $12. However, look what occurs. The total value Logic is receiving, the total amount of money he walks home with at the end of the week, has just gone from $320 to $360, despite the fact that he is working a quarter less hours. Very well, but let us suppose Logic's wife, concerned about their future income, decides to begin selling labor in competition with him. Now there are two workers, and having taken a 20-hour-a-week job herself, the total leaps to 50 hours a week sold. The price falls accordingly. And now the household that was previously making $320 and then $360 respectively is now making a scant $200. Logic, in a fit of pique, quits his job and goes home, reducing the total hours sold in the market to a mere 20. But again, the price shifts, as it must in a supply and demand economy, increasing to $16 per hour, and Yvette, now the only worker, is making exactly the same $320 her husband was formerly making, working twice the number of hours she now is. And this is, to quote Proudhon, no far-fetched inference, no vain induction. The proof is available in all the records. In every area we have seen the supply of labor increase. Wages as a share of the productive output have fallen proportionally. So what are we to surmise? If the phenomenon we observe exactly represents the demand for commodities being static, then we must assume the demand for commodities is static, regardless of what mainstream economics tells us about the infinity of human desire. I have for some time been debating producing a series of videos upon the subject of how feminism does not comport with the central tenets of socialism or communism. Very frequently, commentators such as Sargon or V or many others, will assert that feminism is communist, to which I begin scratching my head, wondering what communist text they could possibly have read that would lead to such a conclusion. And the answer I invariably reach is that they cannot possibly have read any communist text, as none of the principles espoused by any socialist theorist prior to the Russian heresy remotely comport with the tenets being expressed by modern feminist theorists. That said, it is glaringly evident that I am going to have to walk step by step through a comparison of feminist and socialist theories in order to demonstrate that not only are they logically incompatible, they are based entirely upon separate, autonomous, and mutually exclusive premises. There is no way for feminism to be socialist. It doesn't even hold the same evidence to account.